Hi, I'm the True Wise Gamer, giving up my vast knowledge so you may understand games a bit better. You know, I really think I have the oddest timing possible for many of my reviews. See, this review was planned for a real long time. I never got around to doing it because of a bunch of reasons, but mostly out of interest, and when I really did want to get interested in the game again, well, look at that. The weirdest thing started to happen. Because you see, today, we're talking about Tenshi no Uta. While I will be only covering the first Super Nintendo game, I will mention the other two for a moment because you see here's where the interesting thing comes in. See, before we even started, they had actually recently, like this year, re-released the first two games in the series. Though to note, the third game has nothing to do with the first two, by the way, just to be clear about that. In fact, the third game, the game we're talking about today, is going to be re-released as well this year, on September 18th. Yeah. Though sadly, both of the games, well, all of the games, aren't going to be released in English, only in Japan. So a lot of people aren't going to know it. In fact, I hope this video gets people talking about the series because I remember hearing one article, if I can find it, I'll find it, saying that they had ideas to release it in English, but we're unsure about that. And really, there's really no coverage of the games except by this one guy called Gianosis, who covered the first two games, and I really do recommend the video. You should seriously watch it. However, sadly, he didn't go over the third game. Though in their defense, again, like I said before, the third game isn't really directly related to the first two games, so fair enough. But however, it should be interesting to see how the game will be on its own terms rather than being connected to a series. And another fun thing about this review, it's another one where I'm the first one to cover it on YouTube. Seriously, this should not be so weird. Like, I do take some pride in that, but at the same time, it's a little weird. But in any case, let's actually talk about the developer of the game, that being Telenet Japan. Telenet Japan is a very more retro-known company, mostly dying out during the 2000s, where they basically released nothing. In fact, they were pretty much bought up by Sega and a bunch of other smaller companies that just bought their catalog, so that's why we have their re-releases. Though notably, one of the games they did release, and one of them was something that's really personal to me, was the Ballad series, which if you don't know, Ballad 3 is one of my favorite games on the Sega Genesis, and maybe I'll talk about those games some other day, but another time. Really, the only other notable thing about this company was that a lot of the people who worked on this game would later on go work on, well, the Tales of game, and some of them would also later on go into doing some of the Star Ocean games as triads. So, there's that. It's a very weird thing, and very interesting how things connect through time. And that last part will kind of come in necessary because what we'll talk about next time. But we could talk about that after we talk about Tenshi no Uta, Hymn of the Angels, because yes, that's the surname, I just been calling it Tenshi no Uta because it's a lot simpler. So we're all clear. The game begins with a girl named Kalina, wistfully waiting for the circus to start up, as we also meet our main character, Rayard, who I'll be shortening down to Ray. Ray here is a kid who feels a bit listless, as he's preparing to do some jobs for his dad as he meets Kalina. And well, love at first sight happens here. They talk a bit, and Kalina begins to talking about her backstory. Basically, she was abandoned as a kid and later on joined the circus to try to find them. Then some teen drama starts to happen and it's like, whatever, but Anyway, it basically just ends up being Ray doesn't try to pursue Kalina to not stop her from achieving her dream of trying to find her parents, but then really quickly realizes that this was stupid and tries to find her, and then later learns that she was kidnapped by the Count in order to marry her. Though what he's account of is not very clear because, you know what, never mind, it's not important. It's just one of those things that I'm just weird about, anyway. Anyway, this Count is really insane, so much so that a resistance has actually started to form up, trying to challenge him. And while trying to rescue Kalina, they actually swoop in and try to help us out, even one of them coming along with us to help train us up a bit while trying to get to a particular place. And the Count goes on a crusade against us trying to find us, but not after making a deal with the devil to trade for power. And well, he then begins to spread demons all around the world, trying to find us. And we also soon learn that Kalina is not a human, but an angel that came down to judge humanity and see if it's worth saving. And of course he says yes and decides to help us out, defeat the demons, and try to find out where the hell Lucifer and Satan are, and save the day and all that jazz. Yeah, the latter half seems a little odd, right? And you're kind of right, but not really. It's like, it's been building up to it, but like not all that important. I know that sounds weird, but that's the best way to put it. It's like, yeah, it makes sense in the moment, but at the same time, it's like, there, I guess. And you might have noticed that I just stopped talking about the plot after that. Well, that's just because there really isn't much going on after that. Because the plot is, for all intents and purposes, that basic. I wouldn't call it bad, but it's more like, it's just there. Like, sure, it has character moments, but they feel like, for lack of a better term, oh hey, here's this thing. Not like there isn't a reason for it happening, it just feels like more there to spice up the moment than just being interesting on its own. You know what I mean? To give an example of what I'm talking about, there's a character we'll meet later called Levi, who's in love with this one girl in this one part, and it's like, doesn't really matter at all. But it is there. It's not distracting, it's just an oddity that is not used to build more on the characters and the world in and of itself. You know what I mean? Their existence is there to be spice of the moment rather than anything meaningful. Like another character, Key, who's a researcher slash historian who knows a lot about the world, but he really doesn't do much else and is only there to facilitate more movement of the plot than anything else. So, like, I'm not even calling this bad in any sort of particular sense, I'm just saying what it is. And it's just how odd the game is built in a general sense. Like, in a story sense, I felt like there were weird reasons for things existing. Like, for example, at the beginning of the game, you are joined by two of your friends from childhood. But after the rescuing of Kalina, they just head home and do not matter to the plot in any sort of fashion. I originally thought they were going to just be permanent party members throughout the team, but apparently not. And throughout the game, your party will be kind of transitioning in and out of team members till the tail end of the game, where you'll just have these for the rest of the game. And like, I don't know how to feel about this because the game feels bloated, though I say that, I don't think it is. Like, it's very weird like that. I don't know how else to explain it, because usually a game that's bloated feels very long and extended way beyond the point it needs to, but this game really isn't. Like, I remember seeing one video that goes in about like 5 hours to beat the game, and even my runtime was only extended for so long was because I really wanted to explore the game's mechanic to see if I'm missing something or misunderstanding it, and I really wasn't. But we'll talk about that later. But I really want to be clear about this. I really don't feel like the game's wasting my time, and it's why I'm a little more forgiving on it, because as much as I don't care for it, I'm not going to really be harping on about it that much because it's just how the game is, and I wouldn't call the story bad, I just say it's just bare bones. And I kind of want to give the same critique I gave Eternal Filiana here, and saying that while I don't think it's good, I don't think the story is all that bad, and there's some interesting ideas here and there that could have been interesting if explored more. Though to be fair to the game, I should talk about some of the niceties about the game. For example, the graphics. The game's graphics are really well done. A little more washed out than I would like, but it's overall fine. I would say some of the enemy design is a little off, or a little funny, like Lucifage over here. Totally funny, like, look at that face. That is stupid. Or the stone guy who's like striking a pose. It's really funny, I don't know why. But overall, it's still fine. And overall, I do think the soundtrack is fine. A little forgettable in places, but overall does its job well enough. Though what's more surprising to me is two of the people who worked on the soundtrack. The first one being, if I can pronounce his name right, Motoi Sakuraba, who would later become well known for doing just a bunch of game OSTs that you would probably know. So I'm not going to name anyone in particular, I'll just throw a bunch on screen. The other one is actually a little more interesting to me because I know them from their other works. That being Hiroya Hatsushiba? Fuck, I can't pronounce things right. Anyway, the guy still works in game design to this day, actually working on the Tales of Arise game as the sound director, which I really do enjoy. Anyway, he's also the guy who wrote the story for Eternal Sonata. But the bigger thing I would connect him to was the Baiten Kaito series, which he directed the first game and was also the one who got it to be remade, which is really nice. It's always good to see games get ported to future consoles. But again, I would like to say, I don't think the music's bad. It's pretty alright. Not as interesting as it should be, but, maybe not my cup of tea. And really, the only thing that was really interesting me as a player was the gameplay. And really, that's not much else either. Because you see, the gameplay is a mostly generic RPG, and I say that with no reservation, because yeah, it is just a basic RPG. In fact, I argue the game's a perfectly fine first RPG, mostly because it's so easy. Like, when I say it's easy, I mean that, like, really easy. Like, I mentioned before that the game goes really fast. There's not a lot of really complicated stuff in the game to begin with, so players don't have to really worry about much of anything, because you have the basic attack, magic, defend, and really all that really is to it. Magic feels a little odd because I'm not sure it's well balanced, because halfway through the game I felt like magic didn't have much power behind it after a bit, so I just stopped using it during the halfway mark. And that really begins to really ask the real question. What the heck was I trying to understand? Well, that was being the parley mechanic. This mechanic is by far the most interesting part of the game. See, throughout the game you can actually talk to the demons, though to be clear about this, they are just called demons, but not all of them are demons in the literal. Some are, but it's just the kind of name they're just given as a whole. Okay? Okay. Cause yeah, you can talk to demons like in SMT. However, this one functions fundamentally different from that game. Because first off, before being even able to negotiate with them, you actually have to be able to speak to them. Because yeah, enemies can be separated into 5 categories. That being humans, monsters, the dead, ancients, and finally, actually demons. You also have gesture, but this barely works and it's just there for the beginning. So, yeah, it can work, but not likely. Anyway, before being able to speak to them, you need to buy the language pack so you can actually understand them. And they are really more restricted till near the tail end of the game, so be aware of that. And also, like SMT, even when you have the right skills to talk to them, this is still random, so they might even still decide not to talk to you even if you have the right skill to talk with them. And even after you successfully talk to them, there is still more randomness on top of that, as it can pull from 6 options and you'll be given 3 of those options. Those being to gain money, XP, black coins, buying an item, friendship points, or just avoiding more battles. You will still want to do this just so you can gain more XP and money, and also gaining some parlay XP so you can be having a more likely to do this, though how much of an increase this does is very unclear. The game doesn't really elaborate on this mechanic all that well. But in any case, one of the first things you'll really want to ask for, if you ever get the option, is trying to ask for more money. Because throughout the first half of the game, there is so much gear you want to buy and not enough money to actually gain it. Though I actually say that, the game again isn't really even that hard. Like, even if you're trying to still buy gear, as long as you focus on your defense more than your offense, you'll be more than fine. In fact, the only time I ever had a hard time was against one boss, and that was mostly because they used magic, which basically none of the characters had a defense against, so I was pretty much boned throughout most of it, until I just, did it. And actually now thinking about this, I was really underleveled throughout most of the game because again, this game is really easy. In fact, the game will actually award levels to you if you're still underleveled at certain points. And this happened twice for me. This was mostly here to prevent players from being very underleveled. And I get why, but at the same time it's a little needless, as again the game's super easy. Plus, even with the gear, more times than not, the only thing you'll ever really have to worry about is one-shot attacks, because more times than not, your characters are dodging left and right, so even if they get hit, they'll likely not get hit again. And that's mostly because this game has a real weird mechanic where dodging is like super easy. Like, throughout most of the game, it was either they couldn't get hit or I couldn't get hit, and it was very annoying. And really, the only time I ever did grind was somewhere near the tail end of the game, and that was just mostly so I can get some gear and try out some of the parlay mechanics to more in-depthly understand it. And one of the things I was trying to do was also gain black coins that were ultimately useless. They're only there so that you can basically gain some items near the tail end of the game that just aren't worth it. They just are not. And really, more times than not, I was just trying to use it to gain more gear because they can sell gear that is better than any gear you can buy. But again, not that much. And really, you can find some gear around the level, so not even that much. In fact, thinking about the level designs, I'm gonna just tell you now, basically from the top up, most of these dungeons could just be a straight line and nothing would be lost. There are some twists and turns, but nothing really making it worthwhile to just explore fully. Like, there might be a treasure here or there, but more times than not, it's just not worth it. So, okay, throughout all my talking of the parlay mechanic, what exactly makes it interesting? Well, that's actually where we need to talk about the last mechanic I haven't talked about, that being the friendship mechanic. See, this mechanic is very weird, and I mean weird. See, every successful or semi one basically gives you friendship points that allow you to do a very strange thing. So, okay, in S&T, after befriending a demon, they can join you. Here, no. But they will decide to just randomly join in a fight sometimes and attack, then leave. Okay, but what makes that so weird? Well, like I said, they can just randomly appear, even in bosses. So that means they can just join a fight and finish off a boss just like that. And that happened with the final boss of the game. I cannot joke with you on this. Yeah, Satan, Lord of all evil, defeated by a random spider. And let me just tell you right now, that is fucking hilarious. Though, if you want to know a real annoying thing about this mechanic, it's that it is so quick, I barely even noticed. Like, I cannot joke about this to you. Mostly because this game is quick. Like, when I say it was quick, I'm not joking. Like, you see this? I had to slow this down multiple times just to show it off because it is that quick. And that really does show how much of this mechanic was just not planned out properly. Where a mechanic like this can just randomly appear and you wouldn't even notice something that you will blink and miss it. And I don't know, it's just still funny in my head where this random ass spider just walking around the final boss castle. And he's like, oh, hey, it's those guys. Maybe I should help them out. And oh, hey look, that's my boss. And then decide to deck him in the face so hard he dies. It just proceeds to leave. Like, I don't know how else to explain this. Like, that is just what essentially happened. And mind you, this mechanic is barely even useful in most cases because the amount of damage they can deal is not a lot. So even when they do show up, they might not even do enough damage to even be worth it. But I had this happen 3 times. And 2 of these times were with plot crucial enemies. One of them who was super important to the game's plot. And he just dies from this random ass person just coming in and leaving. It's just one of those things where my mind can't handle it. And it's like, this is by far the most interesting thing about the game, and that kind of sucks. Because let's be clear about this. At the end of the day, Tenshi no Uta is a mediocre game at the end of the day. For everything it does right, it does something mediocrely wrong. Like, not egregiously wrong, but not interesting. Basically, any attempts to be different is marred by its simplicity and genericness. I say this not out of hatefulness for the game, I just say it as a matter of fact. The game isn't that interesting. The parlay mechanic is the only thing that's really interesting about it, and that's just because of one minor part of the mechanic that I don't think the developers meant for this thing to happen. So it's kind of weird to think about it that way. But really, again, I really don't hate this game, but I really don't feel like... yeah, it's just there, man. And sometimes that's worth it enough as is. Next time we'll talk about a game that I mentioned a little bit how it's connected to this game. Next time we're talking about Star Ocean, The Last Hope.